All right, so of course, we're talking about Jim Thorpe. Um, to you, what is his greatest legacy?
Well, he's arguably the greatest athlete in world history, all around athlete. Um, there are a lot of great athletes, and it's hard to compare them by generations, but no one did what Jim Thorpe did. The sort of triple crown of being a great football player, All American football player, the first president of the National Football, what became the National Football League, a gold medalist in the decathlon and pentathlon, and a Major League Baseball player. He could do everything. And so I think that's in sports, that's his legacy. There are other aspects to him as well, but that's the main reason people know him.
So I did a couple of interviews yesterday, and we talked about kind of both parts of it. Obviously, most people, when you hear the words or the name Jim Thorpe, you think of the athlete. You think of, the gold medals, the Major League Baseball, the
Right.
NFL. But a lot of the people that I spoke with yesterday talked about kind of everything else and how he was such a great person off the field or the court or the track. And it's pretty amazing to me that you could say off the field, the court, and the track. Just shows how amazing of an athlete he really was. But they all talked about how good of a human being he was. So one of the things we talked about was when he died, he was broke because he would give out so much money to, his friends and people that needed it more than he did. And so him as a human being was also, he was also a very good person. So I think that's something that, aside from all the impact he's had on the world as an athlete, that's kind of something that it almost goes by the wayside a little bit when you talk about Jim Thorpe.
Well, I don't think you should turn him into a hero in that sense. He was a human being with his own flaws. He had three wives. He had struggled with alcohol. His children, when they were growing up, really didn't know him very well because he wasn't around. And yet he persevered through all those difficulties and all the difficulties that were thrown at him because he was a Native American. He was a very generous person. He did have a good heart. He also had flaws. And I think that you should never sort of have an hagiography of someone because it sort of diminishes their humanity. His humanity was that he was a good person who struggled against life, against what society threw at him, which was a lot because he was a Native American, and then went through it all and survived.
So him being a Native American, of course, was, it's big for our story. We're based in Harrisburg, right near Cumberland
Yeah.
County, right near Carlisle, where the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was, where he obviously attended. Can you talk a little bit about, his early life and especially his time at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, how that kind of shaped him and his future?
The Carlisle Indian Industrial School was the flagship school run by the federal government of all the Native American boarding schools. And it basically tried to take away the culture of Native Americans, take away their language, their religion, their philosophy of life, cut their hair. And so it was an effort to assimilate them into American society. And Jim Thorpe sort of got the best and the worst of that situation. But the school was essential in his life because it's where he rose to fame.
Yeah, and the motto of the school was kill the
Kill the
Indian in
Indian.
him and save the man. Um, Go ahead.
Yes. Richard Henry Pratt, the founder of the school, uttered that phrase, kill the Indian, save the man. And that was the motto of the school, which was to try to assimilate Native Americans and tame them, quote unquote, so that they could survive in white society. And in doing so, it stripped them of their humanity and their being as Native Americans.
Did it work?
It didn't work. I mean, it worked in the sense that it was awful. And, one of the most haunting things, I don't know if you've seen it, Andrew, but if you go to that school, you'll see a cemetery where row after row of young Native Americans died while they were there. It was a difficult, cruel place. And yet, so many of the Native Americans who survived that went on to become lawyers, doctors, Native activists, and really persevered. And, the effort to force Native Americans to give up all of their own heritage to survive in America, luckily, did not work.
Yeah, we went to where that cemetery is yesterday, where the Carlisle barracks are. We also went to a display at the Cumberland County Historical Society, and it was very interesting. They had a whole exhibit with the about the Indian School, and there were two rows. One row had how many students were there year by year. It would go around, and right below it was another bar with how many students died at the school that year, and it was pretty striking numbers. One year was like 20 something. It was like 3% of the students at the school that year died. And then Jim Thorpe comes and those numbers start to dwindle a little bit. People are still dying and getting killed at the school. But it seemed like things kind of turned a little bit once Thorpe arrived.
I think things did turn at the turn of the century up until the school was closed shortly after Jim Thorpe left there. I don't think it had to do with a change in policy so much as a change in healthcare, perhaps. So many of the young students died of diseases that they'd never been exposed to before in their native nations. And so that was part of it. But yeah, it's still haunting to understand how many students there died while they were there. And only, as you know, only in the last 5 or so years have many of the bones of those children been able to be repatriated to their homelands.
Yeah, the photographer I was working with yesterday was telling me about that, and he had been to one of those ceremonies with the bones and getting them back. So, yeah, it's a lot of history there, and a lot of things that I don't think you know people really understand was happening during that time and at that school in Carlisle.
That's what attracted me to the story more than anything else, was to understand through the life of Jim Thorpe, all the drama of his sports, to use that as a way to describe really what Native Americans faced in America from the late 19th century through the middle of the 20th century, which was a forced attempt at assimilation.
How do you feel he was able to persevere through all that?
Well, he struggled, but he never stopped. He was always looking for the next chance for him. Society didn't provide those chances very often, but he just kept going from job to job, from state to state, always looking for the next opportunity for himself. He never gave up. And that's sort of, in a sense, symbolic of his entire race. That through everything that was thrown at them, they kept going and prevailed in the end. For all the troubles that are still faced in Indian nations, they were not decimated.
So one of the things that we also talked about yesterday with a few different people was obviously him as an athlete, the rise of him as an athlete, and at the Carlisle Indian School, and obviously beyond. And there's that famous football game where Pop Warner coached Carlisle with Jim Thorpe, and they played against Army with Dwight Eisenhower,
Yeah.
the Carlisle Army football game. Since I've been able to, start working on this story, it's been something that kind of everybody has been talking about. He played in this incredible football game against Dwight Eisenhower, and Pop Warner was the coach. It's these people that you may not associate with the area of Carlisle, especially. But I didn't even realize Dwight Eisenhower played football for Army, let alone would he have played Jim Thorpe and Carlisle in a football game that we're now talking about all these years later. As a football player, as kind of as a multi-sport athlete, where did it start? What sport did he start with, and how did he become an athlete in so many different sports? Because it was the pentathlon, the decathlon. He played baseball and football. He even played basketball as well. It was so many sports, but where did it start? How did he become an athlete?
Well, it's probably started back in Oklahoma in the Sac and Fox Nation, where there were a lot of different games. They weren't the organized sports that he would get to at Carlisle, but whether it was hunting or fishing or swimming in the rivers, he running from place to place, carrying deer on his shoulder when he went hunting with his dad. All of that sort of stuff made him strong and fast. And then when he got to Carlisle, it actually started almost by accident. He was walking back from the little farm plot at the school and saw some guys doing the high jump, and he was wearing overalls. And he could jump higher than they could. And Pop Warner heard about that, and the next day he was on the track team. So that's where it started. And from there, uh, he didn't really want Thorpe to play football at first because he didn't want him to get hurt. He was such a great track star. But inevitably, he was so much better than everybody else on the team that Warner couldn't keep him off the team. And that Army game that you talked about is probably one, it's hard to sort of transfer sports to a larger meaning. It's really just a game. And yet that game had such a larger meaning. It was the Army against the Indians, on a level playing field at last. And the Indians clobbered them. So it was some small measure of redemption and revenge.
Yeah, I heard they had to. One person said yesterday they had to change the rules so the white guys had a chance in football because they were just getting smacked around all the time, and they just couldn't compete. It was a very interesting thing to hear her say.
Yeah, the Carlisle football teams of that era were among the best in the country, and in some years, Jim Thorpe's senior year were the best in the nation, and it was a small school competing against what then were the powerhouses. You wouldn't think of them today as such, but Army was one. Yale and Harvard were great football teams. Syracuse, which is okay now, but none of the Southern teams were noted then. It was all on the East Coast, and Carlisle was as good as any of them.
I like that the Southern team's good. I went to University of Miami, so I like
Oh,
that football has made its way down to Florida and all that. So they had a fun year this year for me.
yes, they did.
Um, I totally forgot what I was about to ask next. Um, oh yeah, so you know he has all these accomplishments. Then we get to the Olympics, and it's arguably one of the greatest accomplishments in sport history. The decathlon and pentathlon, gold medal, same Olympics. And it not only put Jim Thorpe on the map, it put, I think, Native Americans on the map, and it also kind of made a boom with sports in the United States. He came back with the ticker tape parade and all sorts of things like that. How do you think Jim Thorpe has shaped sport today in the United States?
Well, I think if you had a Mount Rushmore of athletes, Jim Thorpe would have to be on it as the greatest um, all around athlete in American history. I think that, 1912, there were Olympics before that, going back to 1898, but those first the 1912 Olympics were the first really worldwide Olympics. Um, and there were more events going on, and the competition was the best that year. But when you think about it, Andrew, um, that not only was Thorpe the greatest athlete, all around athlete in American history, but that one single year of 1912 was the greatest year that any athlete could ever have because he not only won the Olympics, but he came back and was the great All American football player that beat Army that same year. Just a stunning example of sports, of a terrific sportsman that Jim Thorpe was. That one year was the best ever.
It's unbelievable, even just to read about it. It's like it doesn't seem real. The pentathlon, the decathlon, both gold, one
Yep.
Olympics. It's fascinating. You can't even really explain how unbelievable it is as a feat, just because it's so impressive to win both of them.
It was impressive in reality, and it also created the myth of Jim Thorpe at the same time. And really, when you think about great figures in American history or in sports, there's a certain mythology to them as well. And that's what Jim Thorpe sort of rose from human to myth in that single year and those Stockholm Olympics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So your book came out a couple of years ago. So it wasn't like, you wrote this book right after he died. It came out, not too long ago. Why do you think it's so important to keep a figure like Jim Thorpe at the forefront of people's minds?
Well, I think that what I try to do with sports figures, and he's the third one that I've written about, is to sort of show the sociology and history of the United States through those figures. And certainly Jim Thorpe is relevant at all times because what he represents both as an athlete and as a human being who survived as a Native American in this country. And so that's really why I wanted to write the book, was to show what Native Americans endured during that period, with Jim Thorpe as sort of the symbol of all of that.
What do you think was the most interesting thing you found out when writing the book? The thing that people might have never ever thought when thinking about Jim Thorpe.
Well, the most depressing thing I found out was that Pop Warner is not the hero that people portray him to be. That when Jim Thorpe was lost those medals, Pop Warner knew exactly what Thorpe had been doing playing minor league baseball, and he lied about it to save his own reputation. So, the Thorpe sort of persevered after that, after being let down by sort of his mentors, was really something I didn't really realize until I did the book. In terms of surprises, I mean, he could do anything. He was a great ballroom dancer. He played ice hockey. He was a great swimmer who saved lives as a lifeguard. He was good at marbles. So, all of those sorts of things. There was not a single thing that Jim Thorpe couldn't do.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you a little while ago was there anything he could not do well? It does not appear like there's much that he couldn't do.
One of his teachers at Carlisle was the great poet Marianne Moore, who was a very young woman there, and she was teaching, and she remembered Jim Thorpe quite well, and how generous he was, and how good his handwriting was.
Because of course he had to have perfect handwriting on top of everything else he could do.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Last thing I want to ask, how would, in your own words, how does Jim Thorpe define America?
Jim Thorpe defines America because America is a very diverse place with a lot of different nationalities and races, and he managed to transcend all of that and become a great figure for all of America. And that's what, sort of the dream of America is, that anybody can make it, and Jim Thorpe proved that.